Tell me where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments. A city, a state, wherever you are. Every single one of those comments matters more than you know. And before we go any further, a note. Some elements of this story have been changed for narrative purposes. Names, places, certain details. But what it says about family, about fathers, about the things we almost miss, that part is for you. I'm not a man who cries at funerals. I held it together at my father's, at my uncle's, at my wife's. I stood at the graveside in each case with my jaw set and my hands folded, and I waited for everyone else to need something so I could focus on that instead of the thing I couldn't fix. My daughter used to say that was my superpower and my problem, both at once. She wasn't wrong about much. My name is Walter Gaines. I'm 63 years old. I spent 38 years as a licensed electrician and then a contractor in Greensboro, North Carolina, running my own crew by the time I was 40. My hands tell that story better than I do, scarred across the knuckles. The left index finger bent slightly at the joint from a conduit accident in 2004 that healed crooked and never let me forget it. My wife Ellen used to say my hands were the most honest thing about me. Said you could tell everything a man had ever done just by looking at his hands. Ellen passed 2 years ago this past March. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand in a hospital room while a monitor made a sound I will never unhear as long as I live. I drink my coffee from the same green mug she bought at a craft fair in Asheville the October before she got sick. It has a small hairline crack along the handle that doesn't affect the seal but makes me careful when I pick it up. I have not thrown it away. I will not throw it away. The morning of my son Marcus's Thanksgiving, I was standing at my kitchen counter at 5:45 with that green mug, watching the November dark hold on outside the window over the sink. Marcus had called 4 days earlier to remind me about dinner. His voice had been careful in a way that I'd trained myself not to examine too closely. Not nervous exactly. Careful. The way a man sounds when he's walking a path he knows has soft spots, and he's trying not to telegraph which ones he's already learned about. His in-laws were hosting. They had a place out in Summerfield, 5 acres, a pond, a house that Beverly Crane, his mother-in-law, had described to me exactly once as a farmhouse renovation, but was actually a new construction, meant to look like one. I knew the difference. I'd built enough of both. Marcus and I had talked less in the past 18 months than in any period since he left for college. He still called. He texted more than he used to, which sounds like more contact but is actually less. Shorter exchanges, easier to control, easier to end without explanation. When he did visit, his wife Amber was always calling before he'd finished his second cup of coffee. Not emergencies, just calls, just reminders that his attention had somewhere else it was supposed to be. I told myself the things fathers tell themselves, that marriage reorganizes a man's priorities, that the early years are an adjustment, that it would settle. I was still telling myself those things when I backed my truck out of the driveway at 10 that morning. My neighbor Hector came out of his garage as I was leaving and raised a hand. Hector had been next door for 22 years, retired postal worker, a man of very few words and very precise opinions. He'd watched Marcus grow up, watched Ellen plant the azaleas along the fence line, watched me work weekends on the house addition I built when Marcus was in middle school. Hector knew things without being told them. It was his particular quality. He walked to the edge of the driveway before I pulled out. I rolled the window down. "Headed to Summerfield?" he said. "Thanksgiving," I said. He nodded slowly. The kind of nod a man gives when he has something to say and has decided to say only part of it. "Ellen used to worry about that boy," he said. "Not about Marcus. About who he'd end up trusting." I didn't answer that. He hadn't expected me to. He stepped back, raised his hand again, and went back to his garage. I drove 40 minutes northwest on 220, thinking about what Hector had said, and telling myself he was a man who kept to himself and had no particular insight into my son's marriage, and that I was reading too much into it. I was good at telling myself things. It was not my best quality. The Crane property announced itself with a stone entrance marker, an actual stone marker, carved, with the family name, which told you immediately the kind of money that wanted to be seen. I pulled in behind a line of vehicles I didn't recognize and walked around to the back of the house because that was where people were gathering. The backyard had been decorated for fall. Hay bales, mums, strings of lights on the fence posts. A long table set up under a canvas tent, the kind of presentation that takes most of a day and costs more than some people's car payments. Randy Crane was standing near the edge of the tent with a glass of something amber and the posture of a man who had arranged everything exactly the way he wanted it and was now monitoring to make sure it stayed that way. 64 years old, wide through the shoulders, the kind of tan you get from golf rather than work. He'd spent 20 years in commercial real estate before his company, Crane Property Group, took over most of the portfolio management in the northern Guilford County corridor. He had an easy smile that he deployed the way some men use a handshake to establish something. He saw me coming and the smile came on. Walt. Not Walter. Walt. The way you shorten a name to indicate you've decided you're on familiar terms. Glad you made it. Randy, I said. I shook his hand. He squeezed harder than necessary. I've shaken a lot of hands. Marcus is around somewhere, he said, and gestured vaguely at the yard. Already moving his eyes past me toward the next arrival, I found Marcus at the far end of the tent, arranging folding chairs around a second table that had been set up for overflow seating. He was wearing a canvas apron. He had a smear of something on his forearm, and his hair was damp at the edges. It was not quite 11 in the morning, and he already looked like he'd been working for hours, because he had been. I found out later he'd arrived at 8:30 to help set up. My son, 36 years old, a structural engineer who had designed load-bearing systems for 3 buildings, currently standing in downtown Greensboro, setting up folding chairs in another man's yard in an apron while his father-in-law stood at the edge of the tent with a drink. He looked up and saw me, and his face did the thing I'd been watching it do for a year and a half. It moved through 3 things so fast most people wouldn't have caught it. Relief, shame, apology. Then it settled into a smile he put on the way you put on a coat you don't really like, because it's the only one you have. Dad, you made it, said I would. I pulled him into a hug and held on a beat longer than usual. He felt thinner through the shoulders. I noticed that the way you notice a structural thing not with alarm, but with the quiet registration of a fact you'll have to account for later. How long have you been here? I said. Since 8 or so. He adjusted a chair. Beverly wanted the table set a specific way. Where's Amber? His expression shifted slightly. Inside with her mom. They're doing the centerpieces. I looked at the table he was arranging, at the apron he was wearing, at Randy Crane across the yard, glass raised, laughing at something with a group of men I'd never seen before. I found a chair near the tent's edge where I could see everything and sat down. The next 2 hours were the kind of slow burn that only fathers understand. I watched Marcus refill the drink station twice without being asked. Watched him carry a folding table in from the garage alone because Randy had asked for it, and then walked away before it was moved. Watched him disappear into the kitchen and come back out with extra serving spoons and slide them into the proper containers without anyone noticing or acknowledging. He did these things with the quiet competence of a man who has calculated exactly what will happen if he doesn't. Randy never offered to help. His son Cody, Amber's older brother, sat in one of the good chairs near the fire pit the whole time, working through his second beer by noon, watching football highlights on his phone. At 12:30, Beverly Crane appeared from the house and stood on the back porch surveying the yard, with the expression of a woman, assessing whether her instructions had been followed correctly. She was impeccably put together, the kind of Thanksgiving host who looks like she's attending a function rather than preparing one, which means someone else has done all the preparation. She made one small gesture toward the table arrangement, and Marcus immediately crossed the yard to adjust it. I sat in my chair and felt something begin to settle in my chest. Not anger yet, the precursor to it, the cold, quiet thing that comes before. A woman sat down in the empty chair beside me. 70s, neat silver hair, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She carried a small plate of crackers and cheese she'd apparently assembled herself, looking at the store-bought charcuterie board on the tent table with the restrained disapproval of someone who has standards but has learned to keep them largely internal. "You must be Marcus's father," she said. "You have the same jaw." "Walter Gaines." I offered my hand. "Dorothea Mills." She shook it firmly. "Randy and I have been in the same civic association for 9 years. I come every Thanksgiving because it would be rude not to." She paused. "I do not enjoy it." I looked at her. She had the direct, unhurried manner of a woman who had stopped worrying about other people's comfort approximately 15 years ago and found the experience liberating. "Your son has been working since before I got here at 10, she said, keeping her voice low and even. Randy had a landscaping crew scheduled to handle the setup. She looked at me over her crackers. "Canceled them Tuesday. Said family should pitch in." Family being a flexible term, I thought. Before I could respond, a sound from across the yard drew my attention. Marcus was carrying a large roasting pan from the kitchen door to the serving table. The turkey, fully cooked, heavier than it looked. He had it balanced with both hands, moving carefully down the porch steps and across the uneven ground of the yard. Randy was standing near the center of the lawn with his back mostly to Marcus, in the middle of a story for the group of men. One of those broad-gestured performances where the teller keeps expanding the physical space he's occupying. He stepped backward without looking. His elbow caught the edge of the roasting pan. The pan tilted. Marcus grabbed for it. He caught most of it, but the momentum was already wrong. The pan hit the edge of the serving table, bounced, and the turkey, the whole turkey, along with the drippings, went sideways. The drippings caught Randy across the front of his shirt. Dark, greasy, unmistakable. The yard went quiet the way outdoor spaces go quiet when something has happened. All at once, like a switch. Randy looked down at his shirt. Then he looked at Marcus. "What is the matter with you?" His voice came out quiet and precise. The way a voice comes out when a man has decided not to shout, because he knows quiet is worse. Marcus had gone pale. "Randy, I'm sorry you stepped back into me." I stepped back. Randy repeated it the way you repeat something that doesn't deserve repeating. "You've been handling things all day, Marcus. You can't manage a simple walk across a yard without causing a disaster?" His voice was rising now, finding its range. The group of men near him had gone still. Cody looked up from his phone. "Do you understand what you've done? We have 15 people eating in 1 hour." He pointed at the fallen pan, at the turkey on the ground, at the drippings soaking into the grass. "Get down there and pick that up," he said. "And you apologize to Beverly right now, in front of everyone, because she spent 2 days preparing this meal and you just ruined it. Get on your knees and pick it up." I was already standing. The yard stayed silent. I counted the people within earshot. 17 adults. Not one of them made a sound. Cody stared at the ground. Amber stood near the porch steps with her arms folded and her eyes slightly averted, like a woman watching something happen on a screen she'd long since decided wasn't her problem. Marcus looked at his wife. I watched him do it. Watched him search her face the way a drowning person looks for something solid. Amber's expression didn't change. She had the particular stillness of someone who has chosen a side so long ago the choice no longer registers as a choice. Marcus's throat moved. He looked at his father-in-law. Then he started to bend, and that was where I found out something about myself that I hadn't known before that moment. I had always assumed I would stay calm, that I would be the man who measured his response, who didn't escalate, who thought about consequences. That was how I'd run job sites for 2 decades. That was who I was. But watching my son begin to lower himself to his knees in another man's yard while his wife stood 20 feet away and said nothing. Some things override the part of you that calculates. Don't. My voice came out across that yard like a current trip. Not loud, but it carried. Everyone turned. Marcus looked up at me. Randy looked at me. I walked across the yard. 7 steps. I was aware of each one. I stopped next to Marcus and put my hand on his arm and looked at Randy Crane. "My son is not kneeling in your yard," I said. Randy's eyes narrowed. The crowd performance version of him recalibrated. "Walter, this is between family." "It is," I said. "That's why I'm here." I kept my voice level. I'd learned that in 38 years, that a calm voice, in a moment of conflict, carries more weight than a raised one, because it tells the other person that you are not afraid, which is the only information that matters. I looked at Randy for one long moment. Then I said, "We'll talk again, Randy. Soon." Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite fear. The recalibration of a man who is used to being the most dangerous person in the room and has just registered that this calculation may need updating. I put my hand on Marcus's shoulder and steered him toward the porch door. We sat in the kitchen for a few minutes. The sound of the yard coming back to life filtered through the door. Music starting up, conversation resuming, the world swallowing the whole thing, the way worlds do. Marcus had his hands wrapped around a glass of water and he wasn't drinking it. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," I said. "I did it anyway." He looked at me. His eyes were dry, but the skin around them was tight in the way I'd learned to recognize. "It's going to be worse tonight," he said quietly. "For me. You know that. I did know that. It sat with me." "I'm heading out," I said. "Come over this week. Bring Emma." Emma was his daughter, 4 years old, named, without either of us saying so out loud, after the sound of Ellen's name rearranged into something just slightly new. Marcus looked at his glass. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." I found Beverly before I left and thanked her for the invitation. She received it with the graciousness of a woman who had heard the commotion and had decided to file it away under headings that suited her. I found Dorothea Mills near the gate on my way out. She pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand without saying anything. I didn't read it until I was sitting in my truck at the end of the Crane driveway, with the engine running and the heat starting to come up. A name, a phone number, 3 words in neat handwriting beneath. He was first. I drove home with that paper in my jacket pocket and one hand on the wheel and something cold and settled moving into place inside me. I didn't sleep that night. I made coffee I didn't need, sat at the table in the dark, and looked at Ellen's photograph on the shelf above the television. It was from our 25th anniversary trip to the Outer Banks. She was standing on the beach in a yellow jacket, laughing at something off camera, her hair pulling in the wind. The most alive I'd ever seen a person look. I'd looked at it so many times in 2 years that sometimes I forgot I was looking at a photograph. I thought about what she'd told me 14 months before she passed. We were at this same table. She'd been having a bad week with treatment, the kind where she could barely keep water down, and she'd reached across and put her hand over mine anyway, the way she did when something mattered enough to override everything else. "Walter," she said, "I need you to hear this." I told her I was listening. "Amber Crane didn't fall in love with Marcus," she said. "She was directed toward him." I told her she was exhausted, and the medication affected her thinking. She looked at me with the particular patience of a woman who has run out of time for anything except the truth. "Randy Crane knows what your property is worth," she said. "He's known for years. My aunt is on the county tax board. You don't think that man has done his homework?" She squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll watch our boy." I told her she was worrying too much. Those were the exact words I used. She pulled her hand back and looked out the window and said, "You'll understand eventually, Walt. I just need it to not be too late when you do." I had been replaying that conversation since I pulled out of the Crane driveway. At 6 in the morning, I unfolded the piece of paper Dorothea had given me and looked at the name, Dennis Whitlow. I sat with it for 20 minutes. Then I opened my laptop and found what I was looking for in under 4 minutes. A Facebook profile, mostly private, but a profile picture. A man in his late 30s, outdoors, fishing rod in hand. A job listed at a dental supply company in Winston-Salem. I called my attorney. Julia Park had handled Ellen's estate. She was 51, precise, completely without patience for things said at greater length than necessary. Ellen had liked her immediately. "She bills by the minute, and she earns every cent," Ellen had said after their first meeting. "That's a woman you want on your side." I told Julia I needed to come in. She asked when. I said today. The pause on her end lasted exactly 2 seconds. 11:30, she said, and hung up. Before I left for the office, I did something I'd been putting off for 2 years. I went to the top of the bedroom closet and pulled down the box I'd put there the week after Ellen's funeral. It was heavy in the way things are when you've been avoiding them. I set it on the bed Ellen's side, which I still thought of as Ellen's side, and opened it. The smell reached me before anything else. Her hand cream. Library paperbacks. Something underneath that had no name except that it was entirely hers and existed nowhere else in the world. I went through carefully. Her reading glasses. A photograph of the 3 of us, me, Ellen, Marcus, at Hanging Rock State Park, when Marcus was 14. A string of wooden beads she'd worn every Sunday. Near the bottom, wrapped in a folded cardigan, I found 2 things. The first was an envelope. Marcus's name on the front, her precise, careful handwriting, the kind she used when something needed to last. The flap was folded in, not sealed. A letter she'd written and not sent, or not had time to send. I held it in my hands for a long time without opening it. It wasn't mine. I set it aside. The second was a small folded card. On the inside, in Ellen's handwriting, Julia Park, the house is yours alone. Make sure it stays that way. Her phone number was written beneath, the same number I already had. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw spots. Then I put the letter back in the box, put the box in the closet, and drove to Julia's office. Julia Park's office was on the 4th floor of a building on Elm Street in downtown Greensboro. No waiting room decor worth mentioning. No artwork chosen to soothe anyone. Just chairs. A desk covered in folders organized in a system that made sense to no one but her. And a woman who sat down across from me and opened her legal pad before I'd fully settled into my chair. "Tell me everything," she said. I told her about Thanksgiving, the setup crew that was canceled, Marcus in the apron, the turkey pan, Randy's voice, the kneeling order, what I'd said. I kept it factual, in sequence, without editorializing. When I finished, she looked up from her notes. "Did your son kneel?" I stopped it before he got there. "All right." She wrote something. Then she opened her desk drawer and removed a beige folder with a tab labeled with my name and a date I recognized, March of the year, before Ellen died. "Your wife came to see me," she said. My hands stopped moving on the armrests. She made the appointment under her maiden name, Parker. Julia opened the folder. She had 2 concerns. The first was property. She wanted to verify that the deed to your home on Wendover Avenue listed you and only you as the title holder. I confirmed it. Julia looked at me over the folder. She then asked me to flag your file if anyone ever made inquiries about ownership or approached you about the property's value. My jaw tightened. Has anyone? 3 weeks ago, a paralegal from a firm in High Point contacted my office requesting confirmation of the deed status on your property for a client listed as a private estate planning inquiry. I declined to provide information and noted the contact. She set the folder on the desk. The paralegal's firm has a professional relationship with Crane Property Group. They've done title work on 2 Crane developments in the past 4 years. The room was very quiet. Traffic sounds from Elm Street. Ordinary Wednesday. What was her second concern? I said. Julia set down her pen. She asked me whether it was legally possible for a daughter-in-law to compel an asset transfer if the couple divorced and the husband had been listed on any financial documents connected to the asset. She looked at me directly. I told her not directly, unless your son held partial ownership or was listed on any connected accounts. She asked me whether a joint checking account with your son could create a legal foothold for his spouse. Julia turned the legal pad toward me. I told her theoretically yes, depending on how it was structured. She said she'd come back with more information. A pause. She never did. I stared at the table. Your home was assessed 18 months ago at $380,000, Julia said. That's substantially above the Wendover Avenue median. The additions you built yourself, the back extension, the converted garage account for the premium. Someone with access to county valuation data would know that number before it went public. Like Randy Crane would know, I said. Not a question. His company has done permitting work with Guilford County on 3 projects in the past 2 years. He would have professional relationships that provide access. She picked up her pen again. I want to send a records request to the county assessor's office for a log of access to your property's valuation file. That's public information, and they're required to provide it. She also told me to check my joint account with Marcus. I hadn't opened it in months. We'd set it up when Ellen was sick, for household bills, for the weeks she couldn't manage things herself. After she passed, Marcus and I had kept it open without discussion. Neither of us had thought much about it. Julia told me to check it that night. Look at the authorized users. I did, sitting at my kitchen table at 9 o'clock. The statements went back 6 months in the drawer where I kept paper records. I spread the most recent 3 on the table under the overhead light and read the account holders listed at the top. Walter T. Gaines, Marcus E. Gaines, and a third name, added in August of that year, Amber L. Gaines. I sat and read it 3 times. Then I sat with the lights on in the kitchen for a long time without moving. In Ohio, in North Carolina, in any state I know, adding an authorized user to a joint checking account requires the written consent of all existing holders. Either Marcus had agreed to this and not told me, or something had been signed under circumstances I needed to understand. Either way, Amber's name was on an account connected to assets, connected to my property, added quietly in August while I went about my ordinary life and noticed nothing. I called Julia. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting the call. "It's there," I said. "August. Her name's on the account." Julia was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Don't touch anything. Don't move funds. Don't close it or add anything. I'll file for a review of the authorization." Another pause. "This is actually useful, Walter. It's documented evidence." I said I wasn't sure useful was the word I'd use. "I know," she said. "Bring the statements Monday." I unfolded the piece of paper Dorothea had given me. Dennis Whitlow. He was first. Amber's first husband. I hadn't known there was one. The next morning I drove to Winston-Salem. I found his company online, called the main line, and asked if Dennis Whitlow was available. The receptionist said he was out, but would be back by noon. I said I'd come by. I sat in my truck across the street from the dental supply building and wondered what I thought I was doing. 63 years old, sitting in a parking lot in a city that wasn't mine, about to walk into a stranger's office and tell him his ex-wife might be running a property scheme through her current husband. When I walked in, he was at the front desk, talking to the receptionist. Mid-40s, medium build, dark hair, with some gray coming in at the temples. He looked up and something moved through his expression, the careful neutral of a man who has learned to wait before reacting. "Dennis Whitlow?" I said. "That's me. My name is Walter Gaines. Marcus Gaines is my son." He went very still. Then, "Is Marcus okay?" Not Amber. Not, "What do you want?" His first question was whether my son was okay. That told me something. "He's alive," I said. "Whether he's okay is why I'm here." We sat in a conference room with the door closed and paper cups of bad coffee on the table. Dennis held his cup the way a man holds something when he needs his hands occupied. "How did you find me?" he said. "A neighbor of the Cranes named Dorothea Mills." He nodded slowly. "Dorothea." Something eased slightly in his face. "She brought a meal when I moved out. Only person who did." "Seems like the kind of woman who does that," I said. "She is." He turned his cup in his hands. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you're willing to tell me," I said. "I'm not here to cause you trouble. I'm here because my son has been in that family for 2 years, and I'm starting to understand that I don't know what I let him walk into." Dennis was quiet for a moment. Then, he started. He'd met Amber at a fundraising event for a local arts organization. She was warm, attentive, and made him feel chosen. They dated 8 months, married, and within 6 months of the wedding, he had begun to understand that what he'd taken for Randy Crane's directness was something more systematic. Randy made comments about Dennis's salary, his background, the company he worked for, the neighborhood he'd grown up in. Small observations, framed as curiosity. At family events, Dennis was assigned tasks, setup, cleanup, whatever needed doing while Randy held court. When Dennis mentioned it to Amber, she said her dad was just invested, that it was how he showed care. The third time Dennis brought it up, she cried and told him he was trying to separate her from her family. "Did you ever ask Randy directly to stop?" I said. Dennis looked at me steadily. His eyes were even and tired in the way of someone who has processed something painful enough times that it no longer surprises him but hasn't stopped costing him either. "I did. Once." He smiled and told me he'd always thought I was too sensitive for Amber. A pause. The next week I found out he'd called my division manager at the company I was working for at the time and suggested nothing specific, nothing actionable, that he had some concerns about my professionalism. General concerns. The kind you can't disprove. My hands had gone still on the table. My manager told me about the call. He was decent about it, said he didn't believe it, but that he had to document the conversation per HR policy. Dennis looked at his cup. "I requested a transfer to a different division 4 weeks later. Randy won without saying anything that could be proven." "And Amber?" I said. Amber said her father was protective, that if I gave it more time, he stopped. I filed for divorce 8 months after that. She signed without much argument. I moved to Winston-Salem, and I've been driving a different route to work ever since, because I am still, 4 years later, paying attention to where Randy Crane's company has projects. He met my eyes. Your son is still in it. I told him about Thanksgiving. The turkey, the pan, the kneeling order. Dennis listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he nodded once, slowly, like a man hearing a diagnosis he'd already written himself. That's escalation, he said quietly. When I was there, it was comments and phone calls. What you're describing is worse. He looked at me. Mr. Gaines, whatever you're doing, do it fast. We sat for another hour, and at the end of it, I asked him if he'd be willing to meet with my attorney. He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the table, at the door, at his hands. I've been careful for 4 years, he said. Different grocery store, different route to work. He exhaled slowly, a long release. I'm tired of being careful. You won't be doing it alone, I said. Julia Park is thorough, and whatever happens, I'm in the room. He looked at me. Marcus's mother, he said. She passed 2 years ago. I'm sorry. He said it simply and meant it. Marcus used to mention her. Said she could read a room faster than anyone he'd ever seen. He paused. I think she probably had Randy figured out a long time before the rest of you. My throat tightened. She did, I said. She left me the tools. I just had to be willing to open the box. Dennis picked up his cup, set it down, extended his hand across the table. Call your attorney. Set the meeting. I'll be there. That evening, Marcus called at 8:15. I picked up and heard the careful quality in his voice, and I said, Come over. Now. He was there in 30 minutes. He came through the back door, the right door, the home door, and sat at his chair at the kitchen table, the one he'd sat in since he was old enough to do homework at a table. He looked hollowed, not broken. Marcus had too much of Ellen in him to break easily, but something essential had been running low for a long time. I poured coffee. He held the mug with both hands, the way his mother always had, and looking at it hit me somewhere I couldn't prepare for. Dad, he said. She told me she was pregnant 6 weeks ago. I kept my face still. I've been working twice as hard. Not reacting to Randy. Telling myself it changes things. That everything shifts once there's a baby. His voice was quiet and controlled in the way of a man holding something very heavy and trying not to let anyone see how much it weighs. But she hasn't mentioned a doctor. Hasn't mentioned anything. Last week I asked about scheduling and she changed the subject. A pause. So I called her OB's office this morning. I waited. They have no record of her as a patient, he said. His voice cracked slightly at the edge of the last word and then went steady again. Not current. Not historical. I looked at my son across the table. I know what that means, he said. I've known for 3 days. I just needed to say it out loud. I stood and went to the kitchen counter. When I came back, I set the bank statements on the table in front of him. He looked at them, found the third name. His face went through 3 things in about 4 seconds: confusion, then understanding, then a grief so clean it was almost a physical thing to witness. She never asked me, he said. Flat. I never signed anything. I know, I said. Julia is handling it. I sat back down. And son, there are things I need to tell you about what Julia found, about a man named Dennis Whitlow, and about what your mother did before she left. His eyes sharpened. The hollow look shifted into something more alert, more awake. Tell me, he said. I talked for nearly 2 hours. Julia's office. Ellen's visit before she died under her maiden name. The questions she'd asked about the deed. The card I'd found in the box with her handwriting. The county assessor's file access. Dennis Whitlow in Winston-Salem. The Crane Company's reach into the county permitting office. The paralegal inquiry about my deed. Marcus listened without interrupting. He held his coffee mug the whole time, and I don't think he drank from it once. When I finished, the kitchen was quiet in the way it gets late at night when the world has narrowed down to the room you're in. He set the mug down. She planned it, he said. Not a question. I think Randy planned it, and Amber went along, I said. But based on what Dennis told me, I think Amber understood exactly what she was doing. How long? Long enough that your mother saw it coming before you were engaged. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. When he dropped them, they were red at the rims but dry. He'd learned that from Ellen. She cried in private and presented the world with clear eyes. I need a few days, he said, to watch, to listen, before I say anything to Amber. He straightened. If she knows I know, she tells Randy. Right now, Randy doesn't know what you've been doing. He was right. Hearing the clarity of it from him steadied something in me. Out of our did. I know that my did. You're not wrong, I said. He stood, put on his jacket. Then he stopped at the back door and turned back with an expression I hadn't seen in a long time, open and direct, and very young. The face of the boy who used to come home from school and tell me things he hadn't told anyone else. Dad, he said. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I kept thinking I could handle it alone. He paused. I was trying to protect you. The back of my throat burned. I know, I said. I was doing the same. He left. I watched his taillights turn the corner. Then I went to bed, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, slept. 8 days later, Julia sent the letter. Certified mail. Not threatening, not accusatory. Factual. It informed Randy Crane that documentation existed in unauthorized joint account edition, a property valuation with third-party access records traced to his company's IP, testimony from Dennis Whitlow, establishing a prior pattern of targeted interference, and a record of an undisclosed inquiry to our attorney's office through an affiliated paralegal firm. The documentation was held by counsel. No demands were made. The letter was 4 paragraphs. Randy had the letter on a Thursday. By Friday evening, Amber had come home and sat across from Marcus and said her father had received correspondence from an attorney. Marcus said he knew. She asked if he'd done it. He said his father had. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said she thought she should stay at her parents' place for a while. Marcus said that was probably right. She went upstairs and began packing a bag, and when she came back down, Emma was on the kitchen floor with her coloring books, and Amber sat on the floor next to her for 20 minutes before she said goodbye. That was a Saturday. Marcus texted me one line. She's gone. Emma stays with me. I read it standing at my kitchen counter and felt something loosen in my chest that had been wound tight since Thanksgiving. Emma came over the following Tuesday. She arrived with her stuffed rabbit and a set of markers she'd apparently decided went everywhere with her. She came through the back door at full speed and wrapped both arms around my waist before I'd finished saying her name. Grandpa Walt, she announced into my shirt. I'm hungry. You just got here, I said. I'm still hungry. I made her a grilled cheese. She sat at the kitchen table with her markers spread out in careful order, coloring with the full seriousness of someone doing important work. I watched her and felt something in me slow down and breathe. After a while, she looked up. Grandpa Walt, she said, is our house going to be sold? My hand stopped on my coffee mug. No, I said. My voice came out steady. Our house stays exactly where it is. Good. She went back to coloring. I like your house. It smells like Grandma Ellen. I sat across from my 4-year-old granddaughter in the kitchen I'd built with my own hands and thought about Randy Crane in a board meeting somewhere discussing my property like a transaction he'd already fantasy factored into. A spreadsheet. Thought about Ellen writing "The house is yours" alone on a card and tucking it where she knew I'd eventually look. Thought about Dennis Whitlow changing his driving route for 4 years. Randy came 3 weeks later. He came alone. No Cody, no company truck. A dark gray SUV, and a man in ordinary clothes who looked, in the pale December light of my front yard, considerably smaller than he had on his own property, with his glass raised and his audience around him. The absolute certainty he'd carried like a current had dimmed, not gone, but dimmed. We looked at each other across the front walk. Walter, he said. Randy. I stepped back. Come in. I led him to the kitchen, because that was where things were settled in this house, and I poured 2 cups of coffee without asking. He sat across from me with his hands flat on the table and the look of a man who has run the numbers and arrived at an answer he doesn't like. I read the letter, he said. I assumed you did, I said. He looked at me. What do you want? I let it sit for a moment. I want my son left alone, I said. Him and Emma. No involvement from your direction. No pressure. No calls. No opinions about decisions that aren't yours to make. I kept my voice level the way I'd kept it level on job sites for 38 years when a foreman said something that needed a response rather than a reaction. That's what I want. He turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. And the documentation stays with Julia as long as it needs to. If Marcus and Emma are left alone to rebuild their lives, there's no reason for any of it to go anywhere. He was quiet for a moment. You're not asking for money. I'm not asking for money, Randy. I never wanted anything from you except for you to treat my son like a person. I let that land. You didn't do that. So now we're here instead." He looked around the kitchen, at the cabinets I'd built in 2009, at the extension I'd added myself, at Ellen's photograph on the shelf above the television. He reached into his jacket pocket and set 2 documents on the table. He slid them across. The first was a notarized authorization removing Amber's name from my joint account with Marcus. The second was a signed statement relinquishing any claim to my property on Wendover Avenue, signed by both Randy and Amber, witnessed and dated that morning. I read both carefully. Then I looked at him. "I'll have Julia verify these," I said. "That's fine." He picked up his coffee for the first time and drank. He sat with his hands flat after that, and looked at the kitchen the way a man looks at something he didn't build and now understands he never could have. "You did all this yourself," he said. "Most of it," I said. He nodded once, the nod of a man accepting a verdict. He stood, put his jacket on, and walked to the front door and let himself out. I heard the SUV back out of the driveway and pull away until the sound of it blended into the ordinary sounds of the neighborhood and disappeared. I sat at the table with the 2 documents and the half-full coffee mugs and the December morning light coming in low through the window over the sink. Then I picked up my phone and called Julia. "He came," I said. "I know. He called my office before he came to you." A pause. "He asked what it would take to make this go away. I told him to go talk to you first." Another pause. "He brought paperwork?" "He did. I'll need to see it." "But Walter," her voice was even and direct, "I think it's over." I looked at Ellen's photograph, her yellow jacket, her hair in the wind. The laugh caught mid-breath by a camera on a beach on a weekend when neither of us knew yet what was coming, and both of us were simply there, together, in the ordinary, extraordinary fact of still being alive. "Yeah," I said, "I think so too." 4 months passed. The azaleas along the fence line came back in March. Ellen had planted them the spring after we moved in, and every year without fail, they came back. I'd stopped finding that remarkable and started finding it necessary. Marcus found a firm in Greensboro, taking him on as a senior engineer. Closer, 20 minutes instead of an hour. He came for dinner on Sundays, which had not happened in 2 years. One Sunday in April, Emma arrived before Marcus, running up the front walk in rain boots she'd worn because she liked the sound they made on the porch, and wrapped herself around my knees before I got the door fully open. "Grandpa Walt," she said, "I made you something." She had made me a drawing at school, a house, my house, she informed me, with a tree in the front yard that was larger than the house itself, which was how children draw trees they think are important. In front of the house she had drawn 4 figures, herself, Marcus, me, and a 4th, taller figure with long hair, standing close to mine. "Who's that?" I asked. She looked at me like the question surprised her. "Grandma Ellen," she said. "She's always there, Daddy says." So I put her in. I stood on my front porch in April with a rainboot child and a crayon drawing and thought about Ellen writing, "The house is yours alone," on a card she tucked at the bottom of a box because she knew me well enough to know I'd put the box away and not open it until I absolutely had to. She had laid every stone of the path before she left. All I'd had to do was stop telling myself things and start walking. I carried the drawing inside and placed it on the shelf beside her photograph. 2 versions of the same woman, looking out at the same room. Marcus came in behind Emma. He poured himself coffee from the pot, no asking, the way he'd done his whole adult life, and sat at his chair. He looked good. Not the performed version of fine I'd been watching him maintain for 18 months. Actually good. "I've been thinking about next year," he said. "Maybe buying a place closer to here. Emma should know where her roots are." "I've been thinking." "That sounds right," I said. He held his mug in both hands the way Ellen always had. "I found the letter," he said quietly. I looked at him. "In the box. In your closet. I was looking for that extension cord you said I could borrow, and the box was already open." He held my gaze. I read it. I waited. "She knew," he said. His jaw worked once. "She knew all of it, and she was still thinking about us while she was sick, and I didn't. I should have listened to her more. I should have let her." He stopped. "She said you'd watch out for me. She said you'd never walk away from something that needed protecting." My throat tightened down to almost nothing. "She was right," Marcus said. "You didn't. From the living room, Emma called, "Grandpa Walt, come see what I'm drawing." And Marcus and I looked at each other across the table that had held every important conversation of our lives. And I stood up and went to see what my granddaughter was drawing, and Marcus poured more coffee, and outside, the azaleas were doing what they always did this time of year. And the house that nobody was ever going to take from us was full of ordinary Sunday morning sound and light. I am not a man who gives out advice easily, but if this story has reached you, if you've been standing 8 steps away from a truth you were afraid to name, or waiting for the right moment that keeps not coming, hear me on this. The right moment is not coming. The people who love you do not need your silence. They need you present, steady, and there. Maggie told my friend that. Ellen told me. The women who love us always know before we do. If this story moved something in you, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your own story in the comments. These stories exist because of you, and if someone in your life needs to hear this one, share it with them tonight. Thank you for staying with me to the end. It means everything.